What is up, guys? Welcome back to another Project Boro podcast. A bit of a special one today. As always, I'm joined by Chris, but we're also joined by the legend from Teesside Live and the Gazette. Craig Johns has joined us to talk all things Boro transfer window. We're going to try and cover as much as we can in regards to Boro's window, the incomings, the outcomings, the players that nearly came in, the players that didn't come out. And if we do have time at the end, we will try and run through a couple of questions that were put forth by a couple of the viewers and subscribers here on the YouTube channel. But before we sort of delve deep into specific transfers, me and Chris have already done a podcast chatting through this. But Craig, just talk us through, I guess, your thoughts on Boro's start both on and off the pitch, really, because it couldn't have gone much better, could it?
Yeah, evening lads. It's been a cracking start, hasn't it? I mean, this is my sixth season now covering the club, and I certainly can't remember a feeling around the club as positive as it feels right now. And that's probably heightened by the fact that if we consider the mood kind of going into the season, and the feeling around that with the change in management and how long that took, and then a pretty slow start of the transfer window as well. Suddenly that's all been completely eradicated, and such a high mood, 4 wins from 4, looking really good on the pitch, and then as you see off the pitch, I think there's been quite a big turnover in terms of the squad, 11 in, 11 out, but it feels like for the good, that squad now on paper at least looks as good as I can remember a Boro squad looking. Certainly in my time covering the club, it feels like there's options and good options everywhere across the whole pitch.
Yeah, because it wasn't just slow sort of on the pitch, was it? It felt slow off the pitch. The sort of end of season review kind of dragged on, and then the sort of decision to part ways with Michael Carrick sort of dragged on another few weeks, and the decision to appoint Edwards kind of dragged on a bit longer. And I'll be honest, I was starting to think, well, is the reason this end of season review is even genuine? Because why is it taking weeks and weeks to come to the conclusion that everyone else had sort of came to months earlier? I mean, in my personal opinion, the manager should have been changed after Watford, and then obviously we was given the chance to get us in the playoffs. It didn't quite happen, did it? But there must be a sense of at the club at the minute that their patient, methodical approach has paid off in the end, and many people, including myself, doubted them, but they've come up with a fantastic transfer window, a manager who many were on the fence with. The fans are now eating up the palm of his hand. I can't see how this summer could have gone any better for the club, having started at a point where everyone was sort of doubting them and very pessimistic about things.
Yeah, we had a question from Miss Burndog, and I guess this one is for you, Craig, especially. They asked, were they always comfortable with how things were going to take to get going? Were they hoping things would get done sooner at the start of the transfer window? Because understandably, there was a lot of panic, wasn't there? I think at one point, Boro were one of only 3 teams who'd not made a signing. The other 2 were Leicester and Sheffield Wednesday, who were basket cases at the time and still are arguably. So was it all part of the plan? Was it naturally a slow window, or was there a little bit of panic, during the summer?
Yeah, I think ultimately they went into the summer with a clear plan. And I think coming out of it, one of the things that was stressed to me is that 7 of the 11 signings that they've made were all, at the start of the summer, you draw up your lists, you draw up your priorities, and you might have 3 or 4 players who you kind of add to your shortlist, if you like, for each position that you wish to strengthen. And 7 of the 11 players they've ended up signing this summer were all on those initial lists at the very start of the summer. The other, one of the other 4 is John McLaughlin, who obviously was there for 6 weeks training with the club with the anticipation that one goalkeeper probably would leave before the end of it. So you could argue there was a bit of kind of long-term planning in that one as well. And then obviously there's the 3 loan signings, your Nypan, your Browne, and God, my mind's gone blank. Who's the other? Matt Target, bloody hell. Matt Target. They weren't planned signings as such, but they were taking advantage of the market, or just kind of where they needed a gap to fill. that was a good option to go down and fill that. Or in the case of Nypan, that was similar to Ben Doak last season, an unexpected opportunity to bring in a player that they believe can make a real difference. And Matt Targett coming in, that's basically one in which the only one really where Boro missed out on their ideal target. I think we all know Max Austin was the ideal left wing back target this summer. They were in a position where Columbus Crew were quite adamant they didn't want to sell, so it was a case of moving on and finding the best option. And it looks on paper at least, and from the evidence of 45 minutes so far, that they have found a very, very good option and a very adequate alternative to Austin. And there's nothing saying that, down the line, they can't revisit that Austin one when Columbus might be a bit more, kind of willing to sell. But in terms of, the slow start, I think ultimately when you go into a window with a plan and you have the options, naturally, like everyone, Boro wanted and would have wanted to get more done sooner because there's obvious advantages to doing that. But sometimes it doesn't work out that way. And I think there's always that, kind of thing of there's three parties in every football transaction. There's the player and his representatives, there's the club who's buying, and there's the club who's selling. So Boro are only 1/3 of that transaction, and they need the other two to both be kind of willing to do the deal at that moment to get it done. So from Boro's perspective, they always felt there was a bit of patience needed. There was, different reasons in every deal why it did take maybe a bit longer than they would have hoped to get so many over the line. But very much patience was needed, and it was that kind of, do we just sign anyone or do we patiently wait and get the players that we actually want? And, ultimately Boro took the patient approach, and it feels now that it has paid off.
On the frustration of the sort of earlier part of the transfer window when it was all doom and gloom, there were a few deals that never quite came off. Chuba Akpom, Danny Ings. How close do you think those deals were to happening? And do you think missing out on those deals have maybe worked in our favour long run?
Yeah, the Chuba Akpom one was never really a planned one as such. It was another one of those ones that would have gone in the kind of the Nypan, Targett, Browne bracket of kind of taking advantage of something that was going on. They were contacted by Chuba Akpom's agent quite early in the summer and told he would be available. And decided amongst them that they would, try and make that happen if it became a reality. As it happened, when it was a time where Akpom had, kind of turned down a move to Saudi, and then no Premier League clubs had shown interest, he became available to Championship clubs. Boro made that move, and unfortunately he expressed that he wasn't interested. And as Boro were desperate to speak to him, I think at one point they had planned to send a few people out to Amsterdam and kind of meet him, but he was already on his way to what was Birmingham at that point. And then obviously Ipswich ended up coming in and trumping Birmingham. But at the time he had his mindset on Birmingham, and he decided that I think it was a combination of he didn't feel that Boro were realistic promotion candidates this season, but I think more than that as well. By all accounts, his partner still lives in London with the child, and I think he wanted to be closer to them. So understandably, Ipswich, when they came in, were even kind of better prospect in his eyes than Birmingham, closer to London, closer to home. And then, at the start of the season, certainly you would have been looking at Ipswich as a kind of very realistic promotion prospect, and probably still are, even if they haven't had the best start yet. So that was Akpom. That one kind of just fell through, but they always had plans for attacking options. The guys were saying they bring in Sonji Hansen. We were hearing about him for a long time, and David Strelec, obviously we've been hearing about him for a long time as well. So they were the kind of the targets going into the summer transfer window, if you like, and Akpom was just one where he unexpectedly became available, so they tried to move on that one. The other one with Danny Ings was always a really strange one. I'm not quite sure what happened and why that didn't go through in the end, whether or not Boro looked at that option and decided against it, whether or not Ings didn't fancy it because of a lack of guaranteed game time. I'm not actually sure why that fell through, if I'm being totally honest. It was interesting that on Saturday there after the Sheffield United game, I'd gone down pitch side to do the player interview in the tunnel. We always jump on the back of tees when BBC tees get the player. One newspaper reporter is allowed to go down and get the player as well. So I was down there at the tunnel on Saturday after the game. And as I finished interviewing Aidan Morris, Rob Edwards come down to do his interview. But before he did, he went out and he spotted Danny Ings on the pitch doing his kind of, post-match warm downs and whatnot. And he had a good long chat with Danny Ings there on the side of the pitch, which I thought was quite interesting. It would have been interesting to have kind of been able to put my ear in there and hear what was being said. But yeah, I'm not quite sure, what happened there with Danny Ings and why nothing ever progressed, whether or not it just became apparent to Boro that, they were about to get money in for Rav van den Berg and then later Finn Azaz, and that meant they could move on, what they would perceive to be better striker targets or what, I don't know. But yeah, for whatever reason, Danny Ings didn't happen, but there was certainly talks there and there was definitely interest on Boro's part, which I know Rob Edwards was certainly keen on that one.
Yeah, we can only hope that, we've already seen, I think, from the Sheffield United game that Danny Ings has maybe backed the wrong horse by going there, and maybe will hopefully prove Chuba Akpom wrong with the Premier League aspirations and who's maybe more likely to get there as things stand anyway. Obviously, there were a couple of early incomings. A lot of them, I don't want to say feel like old news. Obviously, Alfie Jones, Abdullah Kante, Callum Britton all came in. Josh Coburn obviously went out very early as well. The first major outgoing for me was Rav van den Berg. Obviously, that was one that I always expected to happen in terms of I never expected us to get more than 2 years out of Rav. I always thought this would be the summer he'd realistically leave. But what was the sort of the dealings around that one, Craig, and the fee we got for him and how he left? Because we understand he wanted to leave, but I thought given the season he'd come off the back of last season as well, it seemed like it was a decent deal for Boro, wasn't it? The money we got from him in the end.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm very much like similar kind of thinking to you in that when he came, we know he turned down top European clubs to come to Boro. So, he made clear that when he came to Boro, he was coming to play football, but his aspirations were high. And I do believe, even though he didn't have the best of seasons last season, I still think he has a very high ceiling. I wouldn't at all be surprised to see him eventually end up at a top European club. Obviously, his move to Cologne this summer is very much similar to Boro in that it's once again inspired by what he feels is taking another step up, but still one where he feels he can play football regularly. So I think in that sense, he's got quite a wise head on his shoulders because not many players kind of look at it that way. A lot of them just make that immediate jump to the big clubs, don't they, and take what's probably a more lucrative offer as well. But he seems to be very keen on playing and developing, which is quite refreshing really for a young player. But in terms of what happened this summer at Boro, I mean, he made clear he wanted to go, and by all accounts, there was a few not too impressed with how he conducted himself in that time, which is a shame because, I do think certainly in his first season at the club, he was very, very good. And yeah, ultimately it becomes a case of when a player makes clear the desire to leave. Rob Edwards has been clear as well that he wants players who are committed. He wants players who are, going to, put everything into playing for the shirt ultimately, and they didn't feel Rav was that anymore. So they negotiated the best deal they could get, and I think the big thing really is not only with that money from Rav were they able to replace Rav, and probably getting, they already brought Alfie Jones in, but then they went and signed Adilson Malanda, who feels like that's another kind of eye-catching, exciting transfer with the future in mind. But they were able to use that money to sign and strengthen other areas of the team as well. So, ultimately, I think, particularly with a centre-back, especially with a centre-back, you probably feel like if you can get good money for a centre-back, you take it because, they're replaceable ultimately, more so than, say, losing your 20-goal-a-season striker like they did in January with Emmanuel Latilafa. A centre-back's probably a lot easier to replace, I'd argue.
Yeah, how much truth was there to sort of the early whispers around Boro's transfer window that we had to sell to buy? I know we always assume we've got to sell somebody to obviously invest to a degree, but obviously Rav went, Azaz went as well. I'd like to sort of get your thoughts on that specific outgoing a little bit later, but how much truth was there to Boro's sort of financial situation? Because I know early doors, there was a few question marks around Steve Gibson and the money he could put in, and others were saying we've got plenty of room with PSR. So was there any truth in Boro needing to sell to buy? Was getting rid of Rav sort of pivotal in that?
Yeah, I think ultimately selling the players that they have has been pivotal to the incoming business, because although they were fine in terms of PSR after selling like Elaf and other players, ultimately year by year, Boro is still a loss making business, and on a day to day basis it loses money. And ultimately the whole point of coming into this kind of strategy and the way of working since bringing Kieran Scott into the club was to try and turn the club's finances around after a difficult period during and coming out of COVID. The whole point is to try and make it a more self-sustainable club. Since COVID, Steve Gibson's been putting about 20 million a year into the football club, and ultimately he doesn't want to be having to do that year on year. I remember speaking to him many a year ago now, and he made the point very clear. If that was any of his other businesses, he was like, "What do you think I would do with a business that was losing that kind of money?" You'd shut it down. Any businessman would. You don't run a business at that kind of loss, but football's obviously very different, and Steve Gibson's kind of affiliation and to Middlesbrough Football Club makes that very different. But nevertheless, you still want to run it as an effective business, and so ultimately Middlesbrough do want to be a self-sustainable club, and that means you have to try and kind of balance the books, if you like, as best you can. So ultimately, to make the signings, they have to make the sales too, and I think that's only fair. You can't, or you shouldn't be expecting an owner to kind of prop up as much as Gibson has been in recent years. Because ultimately that money one day might not be there, and if you're so reliant on it, then when it isn't there, suddenly you are in a lot of trouble, and we've seen that at a lot of clubs in recent years. When that money suddenly isn't there from a benevolent owner anymore, they end up in a lot of trouble, and that's something that nobody would want to see Middlesbrough in, because in the not too distant past, obviously it was in a bad predicament itself as a football club. So would never want to see the return of days like 1986 again.
No, when you compare the January window to this summer, the two for me just feel like night and day. I know me and Matt discussed it at length at the time that it felt like a real sort of scattergood window. It felt like a real sort of blip, because in previous windows you could see the strategy clearly of what the club were doing, whereas January it just didn't feel right. There was players there that didn't fit the profile of players who were going door. The key deficiencies in the squad, like defence, weren't properly addressed. But then look at this window, and we've addressed all our problems, and then some. We got players all over the pitch, real quality players. What do you think has changed between the two windows? Because is it simply a case of January there was too many cooks in the kitchen? Were the recruitment team trying to deliver specific targets, whereas now has there been a bit more of a realignment between recruitment team and manager?
Yeah, I think there's probably a bit of all of that kind of mixed into one, really. I think, first and foremost, January is a kind of difficult window to operate in comparison to the summer. Naturally, a lot more players are available, and also available at better prices in the summer, because I think all selling clubs look at January and think if you're trying to sign players in January, you desperately need them. There's a reason you're doing that, and it's mid-season. You are that little bit more desperate, and so ultimately that's why kind of prices are at a premium in January in comparison to the summer, when it tends to favour a buying club, because a lot of the time the selling clubs want to get the player out as well, so they can then do their own business. So January's notoriously a more difficult market, and then Boro had the whole Emmanuel Latilaf situation bubbling away in the background. They were kind of always expectant that he would go, and they had obviously, well, as we know with David Strelec, they had targets in mind who they would have liked, but the problem is that Atlanta weren't playing ball. I think Latif and his agent delayed that deal a lot as well, because even after a fee was agreed, it bubbled away for another couple of weeks before anything went through. And I'm convinced that was because they didn't really want that move to Atlanta. Realistically, they wanted a Premier League move, and it didn't come. And so,
we got that feeling as well.
I mean, I think it was the last day. I think it was deadline day, wasn't it? In fact, because of the MLS transfer deadline, I think it might have even been after the English window closed that Latif's deal went through. From memory, I can't remember exactly, but it was certainly very, very late in the day, and that obviously hampered Boro's ability to do business as well and do the kind of business they wanted, because until they knew for certain that they were getting that money in, they didn't want to go and commit and spend it a lot as well. So that was obviously a factor. But then there was, without doubt, a bit of a difference in January to previous windows. In previous windows, it felt like, Michael Carrick had always been very aligned with what the club had wanted to do and how the club were going about things. And in January, there seemed to be a bit of a difference as well in terms of, I know there was, he made the decision after selling Matt Clark, for example, to not sign another centre-back when the club had put centre-backs to him. Within about 4 or 5 games, that bit them in the backside, and they were playing Johnny Howson and Neto Borges at centre-back. I know that frustrated some at the club. And then, obviously the David Strelec decision as well. I mean, it wasn't all on Michael Carrick by any means. That would be unfair to say. I think Slovan Bratislava were kind of reluctant by that time to sell because of how late it was in the window. But ultimately, Michael Carrick did take a look at the options there on the table and decided that, Kelechi Iheanacho had that English football experience. He played in the Championship the season before as well, and decided that was the route he wanted to go down, because he felt like Iheanacho would have a better chance of making an immediate impact. I think he'd spoken to Johnny Evans, who played with him at Leicester City, and Carrick obviously knew from Manchester United, and got a kind of a good reference from Evans on Iheanacho, and ultimately that was why Boro went down that route, and obviously, well, we all know how that one ended up turning out. So January wasn't a great window, and I think there was an acceptance from everyone involved at that as well. And I think what you've seen is a considered effort this summer to make sure that those same kind of mistakes definitely weren't repeated.
Yeah, we've spoke, me and Chris, of how our faith in the recruitment team did take a hit following January, and we said pre-season it would take a good window to sort of for them to get us on board again, I guess, trusting them, and I would say they have. I would say with the window we've had, I think as alluded to earlier, we've covered pretty much all bases, which has been incredible and gotten a lot of our primary targets. I guess segueing into January, a player we won't be able to utilise until January. You did mention him when we were discussing Rav Vandenberg. But how important and how impressive of a signing is Adilson Malanda, Craig? Because when it first dropped and I saw the price tag, I thought, oof, 6 million, is it for a centre back from the MLS? I thought that's a lot of money to put towards a centre back. But then the more I'm hearing about him, the more I'm seeing of him, I'm starting to get really excited by that deal. And am I right in saying it was one that the club they've acted on it now because they just thought if we leave it any longer, we might not get him? Is that the sort of deal it was?
Yeah, but pretty much he's been a kind of somebody who Boro have looked at, watched, and identified a long time ago. Really, and he's been sitting there on a list. But as I say, they'd signed Alfie Jones this summer with the anticipation that Rav Vandenberg would be leaving, so there wasn't really a plan to sign another centre back at that time. But then, it became apparent Malanda had interest from elsewhere, and it became apparent that he was probably going to leave Charlotte this summer. So, ultimately Boro acted because they knew they wanted him, and I think as you rightly say, the price tag they've paid. I won't profess to being an MLS expert, and it kind of broke the day before I went on a week's holiday. So So I can't see I've watched too much of him since either. I didn't. I mean, like everyone, when they announce a signing or it breaks that they're about to sign a player who you've never heard of, you head straight to YouTube, don't you, and you watch the videos. But I didn't actually get a chance with Malanda because I was flying to Cyprus the day after it all broke.
That doesn't
But
surprise
yeah,
me, Craig. It always happens
yeah,
when you go on holiday.
every
Every
time,
time.
every time.
He was on holiday, so it's a good chance of that.
But yeah, so I haven't had a chance to watch much. But I mean, with the price tag that they're paying, and when you speak to people behind the scenes, there's a lot of excitement about him. And it seems in the MLS like they rave about him and how good he is as well. So yeah, I think, as I say, there was a lot of interest in him, and it looked like he was definitely going to move this summer. So Boro ultimately had to move themselves and made that happen. And I know there was a lot of question marks about loaning him back to Charlotte for the rest of the MLS season. Ultimately, that was kind of like the sweetener from Boro's point of view. That was what got that over the line for Boro, ahead of the other teams who were in for him, because they agreed with Charlotte to do that. So Charlotte were ultimately then willing to do a deal with Boro. So that's what's ultimately landed him, and yeah, very much one I'll be looking forward to seeing come January.
Let's just hope that we don't adopt Charlotte's man of the match ceremony. I don't know if you saw that online.
Was he
Crown.
sat on a throne or something? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's that. We don't really want to see it at the Riverside Stadium. They can keep that the other side of the pond. On Azaz, was his departure something that the club were expecting, or did his desire to leave the club catch people by surprise?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it caught anyone by surprise. I know I asked Rob Edwards in the most recent pre-match press conference, whether they'd replace him. Obviously, at the time the window's still open, and he'd mentioned then that they'd been making signings with a potential Azaz exit in mind. Obviously, Hansen's come in who can play in that area. Nypan can play in that area, and then Strelec and Kaly Sene can both play a little bit deeper as well. So Boro look well stocked, I think, in that kind of area, if you want to call it a forward or a 10 or whatever it is. Rob Edwards plays 2 behind that striker, and they have a lot of options there now in that area. No doubt, and Finn Azaz was absolutely brilliant. I think he was not rated as highly as he should have been by many Boro fans, I'd argue. But his number speaks for themselves. But ultimately, again, it's similar to Rad Vandenberg. When a player expresses a desire to leave, then why keep hold of him, kind of thing. There was going into the window, there was definite kind of appreciation that he had admirers and there was interested parties. It was at the start of the summer not something that they necessarily believed would develop or thought for certain that he would want to leave, but as the window went on and Southampton's interest kind of solidified, then it became clear to Boro then that he did want to leave and he did want to make that move, and as I say, once that happens, then kind of Boro and Rob Edwards' thinking is let's not keep hold of a player who doesn't want to be here.
Yeah, was there any specific reason as to why he was unhappy, Craig? Because I think a lot of fans were a little bit puzzled. I mean, there could be personal reasons. He might just enjoy living on the south coast, family reasons. There could be a number of reasons, but I guess from a fan's point of view, looking at it on the pitch, he was an integral part of Boro's team, one of the first names on the team sheet, guaranteed football here, guaranteed to be a centrepiece of Boro's team. So was there any reasons as to why he was unhappy? Is it been an issue that's been, a long term? Has he been unhappy for a while, or has it just sort of popped up this summer? Is there any sort of insight as to why Finn Azaz was eager to move on this summer?
Yeah, I mean, the suggestions were that he hadn't quite settled on Teesside as much, and as you see, he did previously live down south. Obviously, I think it was 18 months he had at Plymouth, so so I guess moving to Southampton appealed in that sense. But there was also suggestions too that I know, it rings true that the few times that I did manage to interview Finn Azaz, there was something he said every time I interviewed him, and what he said was blocking out the outside noise. He said that a lot. It was a phrase he got into every single interview he did, and it was suggested to me that he didn't feel like he was loved here. I think more like, from fans, and that he didn't really know if he was appreciated by fans. And I think that was suggested that might have been a factor in why he didn't feel quite settled at this club as well. Which, I think my advice to any player would be to just ignore kind of social media and not read too much into what you hear on social media. I think, similar to my job as well, I hear all sorts of things on social media. You've got to have a thicker skin in this in that kind of job. But, they were the two things that were suggested to me as why he kind of felt, he wanted to move on.
Yeah, it's a real shame, actually, because I guess that's something that he's going to get everywhere, especially the higher he moves up the football pyramid, the higher the pressure will be at the bigger the club. So it's a shame he felt that way, I guess, but, all the best to him. In terms of the incomings, because they were the sort of the big outgoings, one of the earliest exciting incomings that I think caught a lot of fans by surprise was Sverre Nypan. I know when the links started to drop for that one, Boro fans, especially Boro fans who'd played a bit of Football Manager, were instantly, eyes are raised, thinking, "Oh my God, could this be a Norwegian wonder kid?" And I took 5 minutes to Google his name, and I read a couple of articles, and I instantly just felt unbelievably excited by this signing. So yeah, talk to us about Sverre Nypan, because we also had another question from Island Stone 89 asking for our expectations of Sverre Nypan. I mean, is he the wonder kid? Is he the next big thing? And how big of a deal is it for Boro that we've managed to get him on loan, considering he's literally just signed for Man City?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's a lot of excitement at the club about signing him, and I think the first couple of glimpses of him have been quite positive. He was involved, wasn't he, in the build-up of the goal against Sheffield United, and Rob Edwards was great after the Sheffield United game. He noted that, as good as that was, he was just as happy to see him chest pump him with Callum Britton after making a block just outside the box. And like you said, I read a few bits on Nypan after they'd signed him, and a lot of really positive things being said about him in Norway, and about how he is as a character, and what he's like as a player. I mean, he debuted for Rosenborg at 15 years old, which is quite something. But he was playing for their under-18s when he was 14-year-old, and there was a great story about when he was he made his debut for the under-18s, and I think they got a bit of a beating in the game. And as a 14-year-old, it was a big step up physically for him. And his response to that was to go away and do more gym work, put the extra hours in the gym, because he realised from that game that he needed to be physically stronger. And I think you can see that now. I think already at 18, he looks, more than physically capable of competing in the Championship. So there's a lot of excitement about getting him. He's somebody Boro had spotted. I don't know exactly when, maybe a year or so ago, they'd spotted him, but by that point it was already clear that a lot of Europe's top clubs were interested and sniffing around him. So Boro had kind of like, he was a player that they now were in their thoughts, but someone that they didn't believe they would sign, and he comes to Man City this summer. They already have a good relationship with Manchester City. A lot of deals in recent years between those two clubs, and by all accounts, Neil Bowser has a friendship with the City Group's director, Brian Marwood. Is that the right bit? Brian Marwood, I think that's right. Who is from Durham. So there's good relationship between the two football clubs already, and City made the decision when they signed Nypan that they wanted to loan him out this season because his prospects of playing football there were slim this season. Again, a lot of interest in him, mostly from Europe though. And Boro were able to go in, as I say, use the good relations and convince City that actually it would benefit him to come to Boro, play English football for a season. And they were able to kind of use their recent track record with young players and show that it would be a good environment for him. So, it feels like a really exciting signing that, but, want to remember that he is just 18. He's here in England for the first time. So yeah, it's one where hopefully he can have as big an impact as the hope he can, but it might take a bit of patience and a bit of understanding that he probably won't always be perfect.
Yeah, it's certainly one that we're very excited by. I can't wait to just see him in a Boro shirt as the season goes by. Another attacker we brought in.
Just before we move on from Nypan, can I just mention at
Yeah,
the top of the press box? I don't know if anyone noticed, but it's at the very top of the west upper.
right.
So we're like the furthest away from the pitch, the journalists who were watching the game. And I don't know if it's the case from where you guys sit, but when he came on Saturday and him and Hayden Hackney were anywhere near each other, I could not tell which was which. I think there needs to be some kind of competition where the loser's forced to get a haircut, because you cannot tell from the top which is which, and that's going to be a real problem.
Yeah, I think Edwards needs to put a rule in it. Who does the least number of sprints or who doesn't press enough has to get their head shaved or something.
Forced into a haircut.
Yeah, I thought exactly the same. Yeah, from a distance. Thank God they've got numbers on the back of the shirts. But
I
yeah,
can't see them from up there, so I'm no good.
well, I wouldn't without these. Of the late attacking incomings that we had, Kaly Sene is another exciting one. Was he second choice to, was it Cheik Sabaly? I know there was a lot of talk around him initially before, obviously, we signed Sene. I'm assuming it was one or the other with them two. Was Sene second choice, or was he always a main target for Boro? Because I know there were links to Sabaly first, weren't they?
Yeah, so I don't know the order, but I would assume that Sabaly was ahead of Kaly Sene initially, because they made that offer for Sabaly, and it was and that could be a brutal version of pronouncing his name. So apologies if that isn't how it's done, but yeah, they made the offer, and it was turned down by Met, and Boro made clear at that point that was, as much as they were willing to put in at this stage. So that one was kind of pretty much dead in the water from then. I think there was always a kind of slight hope that Met might soften the stance and might, come back and say, actually, that previous bid, go on, we'll do it. But, they never did. And so that's when Kaly Sene became the player they moved on to and signed. And yeah, as I say, you start the summer usually with 3 or 4 players on a list of because it's unlikely you're always going to get number one. So you always want to have, 2 or 3 alternatives. And so that's what we've ended up with Kaly Sene. And I've got to say, I thought he looked really good actually coming off the bench against Sheffield United. He was ready to come on, wasn't he? As Tommy Conway scored, he was all stripped, and then he was kind of made to put a bib on and go running back down the touchline again after Conway got his goal. But he was on 5 minutes later anyway, and I thought he looked really big, and that could be quite quite effective for Boro this season. Is the fact that from what I hear, Strelec's quite a technical striker, very good on the ball, good technical ability, good link-up play. Conway obviously is very energetic, loves to run off the shoulder, and just hassle defenders. Whereas I thought Sene looked really big and really physically strong, but he could run as well. I think there was a couple of good runs in behind and things like that. So what that tells me is that Boro have looked at that and they've got 3 very different strikers there, 3 strikers who can play in different ways, and depending on the opposition week to week, 3 different ways in which they can hurt the opposition. Which I know we've heard Rob Edwards speak plenty about in-game adaptability and things like that, and that could be a big factor for Boro this season, because one of the things that frustrated me, and I'm sure many last season about Boro, is that they felt so one-dimensional, and when Plan A didn't work, there wasn't really a Plan B. And they were so easy to work out. So that could be, for me, one of the biggest positives of the window, is the fact that they look like they've given themselves, different ways of winning football games.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on there. I'd seen very, very little of Sene before he came on against Sheffield United. It's one of those where you can watch people on YouTube, but how many players have we seen over the years who look absolute ballers on YouTube, and then
We've
when
all
on the
been
pitch,
caught out, haven't we?
you think, how did this guy look so great? But from what I've seen, yeah, he looks absolutely rapid, which is something that we've been crying out for a while now, haven't we? We lost Ben Doak last season, and Lat, we've lost all the pace in the team. So to get someone like him in, who's physical and quick, when you pay someone 1.5 million, you don't really know the player. You think, is this one that's going to be for the future, one we might see in a few years? But no, he looks like he's ready to make an impact this season. So he looks a great find from the recruitment team. So you mentioned Strelec there. That is what a lot of fans would say is the standout deal. How long have Boro had to wait to get that deal done? Because it looks like their patience has been rewarded.
Yeah, well, I think it's no secret that they wanted him in January. They tried to do it then, and he'd been someone they were watching for a long time. Before that January transfer window, it didn't happen then, but he never left the thinking. And from what I'm told, this summer it was a case of playing the waiting game because Slovan Bratislava had their European qualification campaign going on. So I think they started in Champions League qualification, got eliminated from that, so moved down to Europa League qualification. And it was the Thursday before transfer deadline that they were beaten by Young Boys and eliminated from the Europa League. And it was then really that, right, but Wickham pounced now and Boro got in there. The Slovan was he general director, I think was his title, had done an interview as that deal was confirmed, and he'd said then that they'd had several offers this summer. I know Celtic were named quite often as an interested club, but by all accounts there was a lot of interest across Europe in Strelec, and Boro had been doing that work on him since January really. So funnily enough, just been listening to his club interview today, where he mentions the fact that he's been having conversations with the club for a long time, and he was he was ultimately sold the project at Boro, and by all accounts he was desperate to come here. This was where he wanted to come, which is a really positive sign, really, that a player with such kind of interest from many directions was sold on the Boro project. And yeah, it's similar to the Malanda one, which we spoke about earlier. Boro paying as much as they have. It's a 6.5 million guaranteed with a potential for another 2 in performance related add-ons. I mean, that they're considerable fees for a championship club not in receipt of parachute payments to be paying, which I think says a lot about how highly they regard him.
Yeah, it's safe to say Celtic have probably gotten the short straw since they've just announced Kelechi Iheanacho, and we're the ones with David Strelec. Yeah, I did grin a little bit at that. I've actually, ironically, just been sent a text from the missus to say that Strelec's actually just got an assist tonight for Slovakia against Germany. So that bodes well, doesn't it? Very nice. Obviously, that was a big one. There was a lot of other deals in and around deadline day as well, Craig. I guess we'll rewind back a day or two to 2 outgoings. One that actually took me by surprise. I wasn't surprised by Marcus Forss moving out to Bolton Wanderers. I think we all sort of surmised, didn't we, that he'd not had many minutes. He'd not really fit into Rob Edwards' plans. Although I do think Neto Borges and his loan exit come as a bit of a surprise. What can you tell us about both Forss's loan move and Neto Borges' move? Because that was a more surprising one. And what does it mean, I guess, as well for the future of both of their Boro careers, if they've even got one?
Yeah, so I think certainly starting with Forss, I think that's the easy one. I think, as you see, he didn't get many minutes in pre-season, and I think that pre-season game at Hartlepool United was really telling, wasn't it? He and 3 others, Barlaser, Hamilton, and Gilbert, who played that game with the rest being under 21 players because they needed to top the minutes up ultimately because they hadn't been playing enough over the course of the summer, which felt really telling for all 4 of them, although 2 of them have ended up still being, at the club this beyond the summer window. But certainly for Barlaser and Forss, 2 players who were, in the final 12 months of the Boro contract and well down the pecking order, unlikely to play many, if any, minutes at all. It just felt like the right thing really to move Forss on, and as you say, in terms of his future, he's in the final year of his contract. I'd be very surprised if there was any thinking towards, renewing that when you've just loaned him out. It's a shame. I think he started well once Michael Carrick came in. There was certainly signs of a very good player there, but unfortunately hampered by injuries in the last 2 seasons. And I think it's one that suits all parties, really, because I think he just needed to get out and find somewhere where he could play regular football to get his career back on track. In terms of Neto Borges, I feel a bit sorry for him because he didn't start excellently at Boro. He was adapted to the league. He was playing through injuries at a time when Boro, Lucas Engel was out injured as well. So he was kind of playing with quite a few niggles and not really showing him to his true potential early on. He turned it around and he had quite a good kind of second half of the season, didn't he? I think he became a bit of a fan favourite, towards the end of last season. I think he's ultimately been a victim of the change in manager and the change in system and style. I think very early on, really, it became apparent that he hadn't quite convinced Rob Edwards. Rob Edwards didn't feel that he was the kind of wing back that he would want. And I think that's telling in the fact that Sammy Silvera started the season as Boro's left wing back when Borges was on the bench. So Borges spent most of pre-season in the minutes that he did get playing as a centre-back. But again, it was Luke Yearlin who started the season ahead of him and started very well. Then George Edmondson and Darrell Lenihan returned from injury. And Borges effectively finds himself, kind of sixth in the pecking order. And so I think, again, it was just one where better to kind of allow him to go and play than keep a player who wouldn't really be happy with not playing at all. The fact that he didn't even make the squad for Saturday's game was telling in that respect, and how difficult it will be to get him minutes. Having said that, I do, and I have said this before, I feel like the slight risk in that we saw in January, what happened when Boro let Matt Clark go and the injuries started happening. They didn't have enough options to cover. There's a real hope now. I mean, they brought Alfie Jones in from Hull this summer, who, one of the big kind of drawing factors to Jones this summer was the fact that he's played 40 plus games in the last 3 or 4 seasons for Hull in the Championship. So clearly he has that robustness. There's real hope that Dale Fry has put his kind of injury worries behind him, and he's had a fabulous start of the season. And then, Rob Edwards has been quite clear in how kind of important he feels Darrell Lenihan's going to be this season. So, I thought he had a really good pre-season as well. I know there was one or two kind of, how will he be after 2 years out? Will he still be the same kind of player? I thought in pre-season, until he got the muscle injury, he looked as good as he ever did in a Boro shirt. So it was a shame when he did get that injury. After so long out, it's probably going to be realistic that he might get the odd kind of niggling muscle injury here and there. Touch wood, it isn't anything serious, and Boro do manage to get through to January, when, of course, Adilson Malanda will be joining them and becoming an extra option then. But there's that slight risk, isn't there, that, not just Lenihan, but Edmondson's had his injury issues. Earlin had injury issues last season. Just say Fry, towards the end of last season, returned after 9 months out. So there's a slight risk there from Boro's point of view that they might leave themselves short. But I guess the one thing they have got is they've got 5 centre-backs. At the minute, they're playing with 3. But Edwards could always switch to a flat back 4 if they did get a couple of injuries at centre-back. So, there's always that option that they could use as well.
Yeah, I was a little. That was one of my first concerns as well. Was around the centre back injuries, because we couldn't. I can't remember how many times we fielded a different centre back pairing last season down to injuries. So I did think it would partly be a bit of a risk to lose Borges, but I guess in one sense we'd have to be ridiculously unlucky at the same time. Which, let's not get too far of ourselves. It wouldn't surprise me at Boro, but hopefully he can have a good career at Bristol City. Am I right in saying that was there an obligation for them to buy him, Craig? Is there a route back for Neto Borges? What would you say is the most likely outcome of this loan? Do you think he's more likely to go elsewhere, or maybe do a Silvera and could he come back at Boro? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I don't recall seeing an obligation or option to buy in the loan deal. I think it was just a straight loan. I'd have to check that one out. So yeah, I mean, there's always that option that he could return next summer and change the thinking. But I think ultimately, if Rob Edwards is still in charge, then I think it would appear he's made his mind up, and I would imagine Borges has gone to Bristol City to play, and whether that's earn a move to Bristol City or elsewhere, I would imagine that's kind of in his thinking now this season at Bristol City.
Yeah, well, we'll wish him all the best, one way or the other. In terms of other outgoings, there were two midfield outgoings as well. You touched upon one already. I kind of thought it might have been one or the other going into deadline day, but we've seen both Lon McCabe and Dan Barlaser go out the door. Was the expectation to always get both of them a loan move? And I'm assuming McCabe's, the thinking behind that is that he comes back a better player, I guess, with Barlaser, a bit like with Forss. Is he in the final year of his contract? Is that basically the end of Dan Barlaser's Middlesbrough career, would you say?
Yeah, 100%. I think exactly like Force, it was just one where they were desperate to get Barlaser out this summer. Ultimately, he hasn't made the grade at Boro. I think that's fair to say. He has certain qualities. There's no doubt about it. He's a good technical player on the ball, but certainly in the way that Boro play, he's never really been able to cement a regular place since he joined from Rotherham, and I think now more so than ever, really, in the way that Rob Edwards wants to play in this, high energy, high press, aggressive manner. I couldn't have ever foreseen Dan Barlaser coming into that Borough side and replicating what Hayden Hackney and Aidan Morris are currently doing. And that's obviously a problem. You don't want your kind of backup options to be so much weaker than what Barlaser obviously was in comparison to Hackney and Morris. So that was one where ultimately it always felt like they wanted to move him on. They signed young Adley Kante this summer, and obviously he's a bit of a project. He's only just turned 20, and he's coming to England and learning the game here for the first time. So there's a bit more of a project around that one. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if the kind of thinking behind what ended up happening with Alan Browne coming in and McCabe going out on loan, it wouldn't surprise me if that was massively influenced by what happened in the Doncaster game. Obviously, beaten in the cup with the two young lads in central midfield starting that game and ultimately struggling. I think from Boro's perspective, if you're looking at that and thinking, if Hayden Hackney and Aidan Morris, sorry, not or, but Aidan Morris were to both get injured or suspended or whatever and have to miss a game together, with Kante and McCabe as your two alternative options, that could be a problem. And I think they've looked at that. Because I remember after the Rangers game, the friendly, McCabe was excellent that day. And I asked Rob Edwards then about him, and he spoke really highly of him, how much high hopes they have for him. And when I asked about a potential loan, he was like, well, at the minute, he's in my plans. Like, there's no thoughts for a loan because he's here and he's part of the team. Clearly, as the summer's gone on, they've realised Hackney and Morris have started so well. His game time wasn't going to be as much as he probably wanted and needed. Now he's 19. So this loan move to Plymouth's come up. Tom Cleverley knows him well. He debuted against Cleverley's Watford side a couple of years ago, didn't he? So I know Cleverley's done a lot talking about the fact that he knows him well and he's tracked him a lot since then. So, it feels like a good move for him to go to Plymouth, play more regularly, hopefully, this season, and then return. Similar to the way that Aidan Hackney did. Obviously, he went to Scunthorpe, didn't he? And he had that season there. And, that wasn't a good season for Hackney, really. He played regularly, but Scunthorpe were relegated from League Two that season. Nevertheless, he came back to Boro. And although Chris Wilder didn't say it at the time, Michael Carrick came in a couple of months later and he became a regular. And it was clear, from the well, it was before Carrick actually, wasn't it? I'm doing
Leo
Craig
Perkovic.
Liddle. Yeah, Leo Perkovic and Craig Liddle. I'm doing them a disservice. It was them who actually put him in initially, wasn't it? And from the moment he got in that team, he just looked like a star, didn't he? So, very much a hope that can be the case for Lon McCabe as well. And I think the fact that they realised that a player with such championship pedigree as Alan Browne became available, and from my thinking, somebody who you would have a lot more confidence putting into the team. If for whatever reason Morris or Hackney has to come out, and if you put Browne in that team, he more closely represents what they're already doing for the team, and he has that championship now. So I think that ultimately made up the mind that getting McCabe out on loan would be a positive thing for him, while Boro could cover for that by getting Browne in on loan.
So there's another deadline day departure, Tom Glover. Over the summer, there was talk of us going in for, is it Ivo Panda? I'm not going to try and pronounce his name again. The whole City goalkeeper. So there was kind of contradictory information. There was some saying we're in for him, some saying we're no interest in him. Do you think that Boro are happy with the goalkeeping options they've got now? Obviously, Saul Bryn's done pretty well this season since coming back from his shoulder injury. Sene now back from injury. Obviously, Tom Glover's gone now. Jim McLaughlin, I believe, came in third choice keeper. So do we think that Boro are happy with the goalkeeping options they've got, or is that something that they might revisit in January?
I think it'll probably be top of the list for January, but for the time being, I think they want to give Saul Bryn that opportunity, and I think he is kind of number one right now. And between now and January, providing he continues as he has been, I don't think there'll be any kind of major concerns going into the January transfer window. But I think it was clear that they were trying to ship Sene out as well this summer, and that didn't end up coming off, and Sene ultimately now staying at the club until January. But it wouldn't surprise me at all if once we get to January, that becomes another thing that Boro are trying to do in terms of selling Dieng and then looking for a providing Bryn, justifies the kind of faith that Boro are putting in him now. As long as Bryn does that, then they're ultimately going to be looking for a kind of backup to Bryn. And then you've got John McLaughlin there, who he's 37 now, but he's very experienced and someone who, from my time covering Sunderland, I know is somebody who everyone speaks very highly of as a character. He certainly was a good goalkeeper. I mean, he's 37 now. He played one game for Swansea last season. But that's kind of what you look for now in a third choice keeper, isn't it? It's almost like a half player, half coach role. And John McLaughlin, from everything I remember of his time at Sunderland, it should be well suited to that kind of role at Boro. But moving on to January, I would expect that selling Dieng and signing an alternative will be something that they're already kind of, planning for and looking at. But yeah, you mentioned the lad from Hull, that Panda. So he's somebody who they like. He's somebody who they have scouted and they do like him. But he'd be a first choice ultimately. I think Hull wanted 5 million for him this summer, and given Boro wanted to put that faith in Saul Bryn, they were never ever planning on moving for Panda, despite the reports. The word from the sources of the club was that we're not making that move this summer. We're going to put our faith in Bryn. And that won't be the direction we're going down. We always expected. I mean, it's quite funny because the same John McLaughlin had trained for the club for 6 weeks, and they did tell us before deadline day that they had a contingency plan in place for if one goalkeeper left. It was always going to be one of Dieng or Glover. And obviously McLaughlin turned out to be that contingency plan that they had there. So it was never expected really that they were going to make a late approach for that Panda. I don't quite know what was going on there and why it was coming out. I suspect that that with the mess that Hull are in, his agent was heavily behind that and heavily trying to push that narrative.
I'm pretty happy then that they've given Solberg a chance. I don't know what you, Matt, but yeah, I'm happy. £5 million far too much for me. So yeah, I'm happy they're giving Solberg a chance.
Yeah, 100%. I was just a question was put forth by a viewer, Craig, was just around our goalkeeping options actually, and Paul asked, with third choice goalkeepers, why is it that we always look to bring in someone who's in their late 30s? Why not bring a I guess a youth goalkeeper up as third choice. I mean, that's something that we never normally see, do we? We'd rather pay a wage for an experienced goalkeeper rather than maybe see one of the youth keepers brought in as a third choice.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I guess it's difficult when you are a third choice, you're probably there not expected to play much, and I guess if you're a kind of a really good kind of young goalkeeper, you're probably going to want to be playing. You're going to want to be trying to push to play, whereas that's not really what most clubs are looking for in a third choice keeper. So I guess if you're good enough at that age where you should be playing, then it's difficult to be a third choice keeper. If you're in a position where you're not quite good enough to play, then that's a worry in terms of having them as a third choice keeper, because last season we saw Boro did need to call upon 3 or 4 in the end when Mark Travers came in, goalkeepers, because of injury. So you always still want that third choice keeper to be someone who, if you needed him for a game or two, could step in and presumably, because he is still playing and they have given him the contract, John McLaughlin, would be still capable of that. And as I say, I think most clubs have gone down this route now with third choice keepers. It tends to be a kind of older, wiser, experienced head, and I think it's because it kind of becomes like, as I said, a half coaching, half playing role, and you want that kind of, goalkeepers. It's a funny position, isn't it? And it's a difficult position, and while you're competing with each other for that one spot in the team, you also need good characters who kind of, support each other and help each other through. Because it can be a difficult position to play as well, particularly in the kind of darker days that you make mistakes and things like that. You need that kind of solid unit and union as a goalkeeping department. So I think that's why clubs tend to go down that kind of more experienced route for a third choice keeper, because it's somebody who will ultimately, have a wise head and ultimately, I think particularly at Boro now this season with Saul Bryn, who's potentially going to have his first season, hopefully, as a first choice goalkeeper for a championship club. Having someone as wise and as experienced as John McLaughlin, someone who, he's played for Scotland, he's played for Rangers in the Champions League, he's played, numerous games in the AFL as well. I think, having somebody with that kind of experience and that kind of wise head on his shoulders could be really helpful for Bryn as well in terms of what goes on in the the day-to-day stuff at Rockcliffe.
Yeah, I don't know about you guys, but I never had any real hope or expectation of Mark Travers coming back to the football club after his loan deal last season. But I do think it's an absolute travesty that he's sat on the bench at Everton. He's, for me, 26 years old. He's a top keeper at this level. I just think he's far too good to be number 2 goalkeeper.
Yeah, it's a shame that, isn't it? Because he came to Boro ultimately in January to play games because he wanted to play, and it was said early on really that they weren't going to be signing him. I think partly because they wanted to give Bryn this opportunity, but also because I think they appreciated that that something else was bubbling away in the background, and they always said it wasn't going to be possible to bring him back. So I know the actual transfer fee that he went to Everton for, I don't think that would have been beyond Boro as such if they were desperate to get him. But obviously Everton are going to be able to play such a bigger wage packet than what Boro were. So, that's ultimately probably Boro were well aware that was bubbling away in the background and knew they wouldn't be able to get him back at the end of the season. But yeah, it feels a real shame that he's gone there, unless there's expectations on his part that Pickford moves on within a year or two. You'd certainly be very surprised if he manages to kind of get in ahead of Pickford, because he's obviously been there a long time now, and he's England's number one, and yeah, it feels like a strange move for him and a bit of a shame because he was brilliant, no doubt about it.
Yeah, I second that completely. I don't know if he's playing the long game. Maybe Pickford is going to move on, but he's never going to displace him unless he's injured in the Premier League. It's a real shame because I think he came in last season and proved he was one of the. I think he had the third best save percentage behind the 2 that went up top 2. So, yeah, it's a real shame. We talked about Dieng and a question was put in our comments from Chris W, who mentioned another couple of fringe players, and he asked what's next for Gilbert, and I guess the same for Micah Hamilton as well. They were the other two fringe players I was half expecting, half curious about whether they would move on. I mean, they've not featured, a bit like Barlaser, a bit like Forss. They'd not featured at all in pre-season, really. So what was the story with both of them, Craig, on deadline day? Were they both actively looking for moves, or did nothing ever materialise for the pair of them?
Yeah, it's on Gilbert's part. Yeah, I'm surprised he didn't go out, be it permanent or loan. Obviously, he had the loan in the second half of last season at Charlton and helped them win promotion. And you were hoping he might have come back and kind of kicked on and made an impression. But he clearly hasn't. And as you see, he's well down the pecking order now. So very surprised that he hasn't moved on, because again, with all the forward options Boro have now, there was times in the first half of last season, and Hull on New Year's Day being a perfect example, where Boro's options meant he did come off the bench, and obviously at Hull, made the ultimate kind of impact from the bench for Boro that day, and he has done that a couple of times in a Boro shirt actually, but he's always struggled to get football here, and as I say, more so now. I can't imagine he's going to struggle to even get on the bench, I would imagine now. So very surprised that he didn't move on, whether or not that was just a lack of interest from elsewhere, or lack of a deal that worked for Boro. I'm not quite sure what happened there, to be honest, but it's certainly, like you, I'm surprised that he is still here. With Hamilton, there was half an expectation from me that something would happen, a loan rather than obviously a sale or anything. I think Boro still have hopes that he can eventually become what they hoped he would when they signed him from Man City. I think we spoke to Rob Edwards just recently, and he spoke about the fact that there's a lot of ability there and a lot of potential. It's unlocking it. That's the key now. He obviously struggled at Stockport in the second half of last season, and again has come back to Boro and not really done enough in pre-season to suggest that he's anywhere near really. But there was half an expectation from me. He might go out on loan, but equally, Rob Edwards did say when we asked about him that the plan wasn't to loan him out, because the plan is he wanted to kind of work with him at close quarters for a season. And that might mean that for the next year, at best, he's playing the odd under-21 game. I wouldn't be surprised at all if he kind of heads down and plays with the under-21s now and then and keeps his match sharpness up. But again, similar to Gilbert, I struggle to see him even making the bench for the first team now for Boro unless there's a lot of injuries happen. But I think Rob Edwards was keen to kind of have him at Rockcliffe and working with him day to day, and coaching him and bringing him on that way, because I think we often think that the best way to develop a player is to send them out and have them play week in, week out, but ultimately sometimes particularly when it's a new manager, a new way of thinking, a new way of playing. And obviously Hamilton's been so coached in that kind of Man City environment, that pass. I think you see that a lot in him. It's one of the things I think I've wrote it before in one of my pieces. He almost needs the Pep Guardiola coaching out of him, because he's a forward, isn't he? Like, he's a winger. And he's got the ability to beat his man and do something with it, but he seems to always want to turn backwards and play the simple 5-yard pass, because that's so ingrained in him from Man City. So I think there's a lot of that kind of thinking at Boro now, is let's just coach him. Let's have him at Rockcliffe and let's work with him on a one-to-one level and make him the player that he can be. So I think that's ultimately why he didn't leave this summer.
100% agree with you there, Craig, on the coaching the pep out of him. We saw it with Grealish, didn't we, when he went to Man City? His role at Villa was he was coming inside, he was creative, and then he went to Man City. His job was basically to hold the touchline, get the ball, play it back sideways. And I think Hamilton is guilty of that quite often, where he has the ball, he has a chance to beat the man, and he can see he looks to do it, but then he second guesses himself and comes back inside. Yeah. And I think if we can just work on him, there's definitely a player there, isn't there? You don't get to start Champions League games for Man City under Pep Guardiola if you're a terrible player, but it's. I think the term you use was spot on. It's unlocking that talent and hopefully the coaching team of Edwards, Varvash, and Watling can do that.
Yeah, it's one of the things he noted actually when I asked about, kind of developing him as a player. I think Edwards himself, but also Vivash and Watling have both come from, academy coaching backgrounds. I know Vivash had a long time at Coventry, but prior to that, he was a coach in Chelsea's academy, and Harry Watling was as well. And then Rob Edwards obviously had a long time at Wolves and the FA developing youth players as well. So I think all three of them have that background in youth development. So, hopefully that side of things will take care. Because if there's one thing that Michael Carrick was very good at in his time at Middlesbrough, it was coaching and developing young players. And obviously that helped Middlesbrough get good players on loan as well. We saw Cameron Archer, Aaron Ramsey, Ben Doak. Premier League clubs wanted to send the young players to Middlesbrough because they knew they'd be well coached and well looked after. And touch wood, that looks like that will continue under this coaching team. So, that is a good thing ultimately.
Yeah, I do get the impression that we don't want to give up on Micah Hamilton, and I think he was a very exciting signing and exciting investment that the club, I think, do definitely believe will come good. So whichever way they decide to go about it, we've tried loaning him out, maybe keeping him here, a bit like with Law McCabe. He's been sort of at Boro for a while, hasn't he, before then going out. So I really do hope it comes good for him, because in the first pre-season friendly at Mansfield, I actually thought he looked good. For the first couple of times he got on the ball, he beat his man, he tried putting it in the box, and it was refreshing to see Hamilton do that. But then he just never followed it up, in the friendlies shortly after that. I went to quite a lot of the pre-season games. He just didn't kick on, and when I thought I'd seen them little glimpses to start, I thought, oh, great, maybe this is the pre-season, he'll kick on. But unfortunately, he hasn't. So yeah, I just really hope that, because he is an investment, isn't he, Craig, that the club are excited in, and hopefully one
doubt, yeah.
I mean,
when he arrived last summer, it was described as a coup, really, that Boro got him. As you say, he played for City in the Champions League. He'd scored for City in the Champions League, and there was a couple of Premier League clubs showing interest in him as well when he became available. So it was described as a bit of a coup that Middlesbrough managed to get him, and yeah, as you say, he just hasn't quite kicked on. But I think another thing that's always stressed with him as well is that obviously he was part of that City academy. He went through and then straight into the first team. He didn't ever go out on loan or anything like that. I think he only played maybe 6 or 7 Man City first team games. So, when you actually count up how many senior games of football he's played, he's probably not too far away from a similar kind of area base, whatever, as Law McCabe is now. And obviously he's now heading out on a loan to League One to get that first team experience. And I think because we'll probably look at Hamilton and think, oh, Man City, he's coming in from Man City, he should be ahead of that. But ultimately, he arrived at Boro really as still a youth player. And you have a season like he did last season where, like us all, he'd have been coming here kind of hoping and expecting to smash it really, and kind of show how good he is and why he was in Man City's academy. And that didn't quite happen for him. And then he goes to Stockport and it doesn't happen for him there. So you can well imagine that, for a young lad, that'll be demoralising. And his confidence probably has taken a bit of a hit as well. So, it's important that Boro do manage him well because as Chris said, there's definitely potential there. There's definitely something there if Boro can unlock it.
And we saw with Sammy Silveira, didn't we? I bet there was a lot of Boro fans who would have been quite happy to write him off after some less than impressive loan spells at Portsmouth and Blackpool, and he's come back and more than proved his worth. So yeah, I definitely think we shouldn't be giving up on Micah Hamilton. We just need to hope that the coaching team can unlock that potential.
Yeah, 100%. The one big final transfer related question before we wrap it up, and the elephant in the room, we haven't forgot about him. The most impressive piece of transfer business that I think we've done this summer. See, Craig's grinning. He knows where I'm going with this. It is, of course. Yeah, we're leaving the best till last. It is, of course, the fact that he is still here. Hayden Hackney is still a Boro player. I mean, firstly, your thoughts on it, Craig, and just, how is he still a Boro player? And how close did he come to not being a Boro player? Because I would have put my mortgage on him not being here a month ago. So just give us your overall thoughts on the fact that he is still here and how is he still here as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure like most Boro fans, I'm absolutely buzzing he's still here, selfishly. Obviously, it would have been nice for Hayden to get the Premier League move that he wanted and probably deserved. I'm surprised, really, that no Premier League club ever did ultimately come in for him. There was interest, but from what we understand, there wasn't ever an offer from a Premier League club this summer for Hayden Hackney. So the closest he came to leaving the club was when the club accepted Ipswich's offer. He went down to Ipswich. He took a look around. He heard what they had to say and ultimately decided to reject that move and stay at Boro. Obviously, at the time that he did that, he was kind of half a mind thinking, well, a Premier League move could still come about this summer. And I don't think he should or would deserve to be criticised for that because, clearly he's a very good player. He's given a lot in recent seasons to Boro. But he has high aspirations, and so he should. He's 23 now. It's a short career. If a Premier League move were to come about for him, then understandably, I think he'd deserve to have the chance to take that. But ultimately, it hasn't. And I think the one thing that you would as well, in terms of not criticising him for that, is there's a very big difference between how the club treated Rav van den Berg and how the club treated Hayden Hackney. Rav van den Berg, I think, was it after Doncaster that he left, but he wasn't in the squad at all for the Swansea game or the Doncaster game. Hayden Hackney went to Ipswich, rejected that move, and was immediately back on the bench at Doncaster and then back in the starting lineup for the first game of the season against Swansea. I think that tells you everything you need to know about, Hayden Hackney and his character and the fact that he is willing to fight for the club. I remember asking about him at Millwall and about his future and things like that. And Rob Edwards said, judge him on what he does on the pitch. And if you're doing that, I don't think there could be one single Boro fan who even doubted slightly that he isn't fully committed to the cause, because he's him and Aidan Morris, as we've touched on, have been absolutely brilliant so far this season. And without watching every championship game so far this season, I challenge any midfield to be more impressive than those two so far this season. They've looked $1 million, those two together in this system and this setup. So yeah, huge positive for Middlesbrough that he is still a player, a Boro player now, and until January at least. I think that could be massive for them. We touched on the fact that obviously the outgoings have obviously massively helped the incomings this summer. The fact that Boro managed to get good money in selling Rav van den Berg and Finn Azaz and keep Hayden Hackney, and therefore still be able to add to the squad but keep Hayden Hackney, to me is probably the biggest win of the summer transfer window. I think we went into the summer really knowing that those were the big three. Those were the three who had interest in them. Clubs were sniffing around. Clubs were inquiring. If you'd have said there almost every, if not every, Boro fan at the start of the summer, those three have interest, you only keep one, I'm convinced that almost every single Boro fan, if not every, would have said Hayden Hackney's the one we want to keep. And that's obviously what's ended up happening. So I think massive positive for Boro.
Yeah, to lose the two that wanted to leave, but then keep the one who was the most important, I think could not have gone any better. And I think Hayden Hackney deserves immense credit for being as professional and respectful as what he has been, because it seems like he's remained incredibly committed from start to finish and hasn't kicked up a fuss. How strong was the stance then, Craig, by the club? Because I know every player has a price. We know that. And if a club had maybe dropped in a bid of £40 million, we might be having a different conversation. And I guess the club can only come out and say it. But how strong was the stance that they were going to keep Hayden Hackney? Because I remember when the Finn Azaz rumours came about at the same time, fans were worried we were going to lose both. But then some were, I think, rightfully saying, well, if losing Finn Azaz means we keep hold of Hayden Hackney and it strengthens our stance to keep Hayden Hackney, then maybe Finn Azaz is a worthy sort of sacrifice. So was that stance always that strong, or did maybe losing Finn Azaz make the club go, right, we can't sell both? There'd be riots. How strong was that stance?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I guess one we'll never really know because that Premier League offer didn't ever come in. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if, as you say, the fact that Azaz was going, I don't know so much as whether it's a fact that we couldn't afford to lose both, but we can afford to not lose both. In that, as we've got that money in for Azaz, so we don't need that Hackney money anymore. We saw with the business that they were able to do once Azaz had gone, that kind of ticked the remaining boxes for Boro, and they've finished the window with pretty much a kind of net zero spend. So, a really positive summer from a business point of view as well as a kind of football point of view as well. Yeah, I mean, I can only go on what the club said at the time, and where it came from was very reliable in that it was a very strong not for sale. It was a text message back, and it just said not for sale, free exclamation marks. So it was as strong as you could get really in that sense. It was very clear, but as I say, Wolves were the kind of last remaining team sniffing around on the last couple of days. Had Dave come in and said, 30 million, 40 million, whatever, would that still have been the same stance? I don't know. That would you're getting into silly money then, aren't you? So maybe the stance has to change. But the feeling very much was that he was so important to Boro, and at that late stage in the window, they wouldn't have been able to adequately replace him. And when they accepted the offer from Ipswich earlier in the summer, what was said then was that they had someone ready to move on, while that money would also help reinvest in other areas in the squad as well. So I think Rob Edwards came out, didn't he, and said publicly that it was a win-win situation for Boro. If you keep Hayden Hackney, you're keeping a fantastic player. If you lose him, you're getting money that you reinvest in the squad. And as I say, they did say they had a replacement who they believed would be, ready-made to come in and replace him. But whether or not by this point in the window he'd moved elsewhere or he wouldn't be available because the club he was currently at wouldn't let him go anymore, I don't know. But for whatever reason, the club's stance dramatically changed in the last kind of week or so of the window, and it was a very clear not for sale message.
Yeah, and I think all we can do as Boro fans is hope and pray that come January that the club have got themselves in a position in the league table where we can say to Hayden, look, there's a chance here for you to lead your hometown club into the Premier League, because I think this is automatically sort of baked in sort of fear now with Boro fans. I know going to the game on Saturday, taxi driver who picked me up, he was talking to me about Hayden Hackney straight away. He's like, oh, well, we've done great at keeping him, but we'll probably sell him in January. And then, talking and stacked to Boro fans after the game, it's fantastic that Hayden's staying. We will probably struggle to keep hold of him in January. So I think people are already worried about looking to January, thinking, will he stay, will he go? So I'm hoping as a Boro fan that we are in such a great position in the league table, challenging for either playoffs or hopefully better, but we'll say playoffs, and we can put forward an argument, or the club can put forward an argument to say, look, this is a great chance for you to, immortalise yourself here with the Boro faithful and lead your hometown club into the Premier League, because that'd be infinitely better than playing the Premier League for Wolves or West Ham or something like that. And, if he does that, fantastic, because then, I think every Boro fan would wish him well to go to a club where I think he should be playing at the top end of the Premier League for, like say Tottenham's and Man U's and that sort of club. So yeah, hopefully we can do the business between now and January and create a convincing argument that his future for at least this season is on Teesside.
I think it's a really good point. I know, thinking back to last January and obviously the sale of Latte Lath, it was a situation really where right up until January, Boro had kind of been flirting in and around the top six. I would say like kind of six, but never really getting in and breaking into that top six. They were always there or thereabouts. And when it came to January, and obviously the interest from Atlanta came up initially, I know the club have been heavily criticised for kind of selling him in that moment. But the initial stance was to try and convince him to stay. And there was a promise on the table, stay, fire the club to promotion. And when we get promoted, we'll give you a new bumper contract. They tried to do that, and ultimately, like Elaf didn't want it. He made clear he wanted to go. So and again, as I say, that kind of, would that have been different on his part if Boro had have looked a much more convincing kind of promotion candidate? I think realistically, bar that slight little era, was it November, October time when they won 5 or 6 games and they were firing the goals in. Beyond that little period last season, they never really looked a convincing promotion contender. Whereas if Boro can continue what they've started this season, get to January where we are looking, at least a serious shot of making a playoff spot, then, I think they've got a much stronger argument, as you say, to take to Hackney and say, like, come on, give us until at least the end of the season. And Hackney's been on record himself as saying that's his dream. His dream would be to lead this club to promotion. He was in the stands for the Brighton game the last time they achieved it. So his dream now is to be on the pitch and doing that in a Boro shirt. So if we can get to January and that does look like a realistic prospect, then surely the chances of convincing him to stay are going to be so much stronger.
Yeah, I guess the onus is on us now, and him as part of the team to do that. We can only hope that I don't think we'd have another laugh, situation with Hackney. I think it's just hoping we don't sort of sell our best player in January again and we don't sort of give up a good thing. But we'll see where we're at by then. I mean, keep going the way we are, we might have won the league by then. Who knows? But that goes on to my final question for you, Craig, before we let you go, because we've kept you for long enough. And it's going to be the same question I put to Chris when we chatted about Boro's start. And I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit as well. Has this transfer window changed your expectations for what you think Boro can achieve this season? And what's your prediction for where Boro might now finish? Because just so you know, I said 12th before a ball was kicked. Chris said 10th. After the window, I've said 7th because I under promise, over deliver. It's Boro. Chris thinks we're going to finish 4th now. So where do you stand on Boro's transfer window, and where's your expectations? And if I can squeeze a prediction out of you, then I'll try.
Yes, I think it's definitely changed. Not just the transfer window, but it certainly plays its part. But with the start overall as well, I think it's a great start, and I think the pleasing thing is that there doesn't feel like any element of luck in Boro getting these 4 results. They've very much deserved to win 4 games out of 4 and looked a very good unit while doing it. But also, Rob Edwards keeps saying there's still more to come, and the players keep saying there's still more to come. And you can see that as well in both, a lot of the signings getting up to speed. That'll obviously be more to come. But in terms of, as a whole unit, kind of learning to play that system more and becoming more, kind of together as a team within that new system, I do believe that there could be still yet more to come. There could be more improvement for Boro to make, without a doubt. So in that respect, I think all put together, it's definitely changed. I didn't subscribe to the kind of, I saw a lot of kind of pre-season concern that Boro would be potentially in a relegation battle. I think I saw a lot of people kind of looking at maybe 16th, 15th was a kind of position I saw commonly kind of predicted for them. I didn't ever subscribe to that. I remember doing my pre-season prediction for the Gazette, and I had them 8th or 9th then. I said they'd kind of... be there or thereabouts all season, very much like last season, but not quite have enough to make the top 6. But having watched the start, the way they've played, and then, assessing the signings that they've made, I know a lot of them, slightly unknown quantities. Will they adapt to English football? Will they be as good as we hope they will be? We'll have to see in time, I guess. But with all that in mind, my expectations have gone up a bit, and I'll probably be somewhere similar to where Chris is. I think it could be a similar seasons to Sunderland last season, is how I see it right now, is kind of, for a lot of the season, we'll potentially even flirt with those top 2 automatic promotion places, but then potentially just slip off, just miss out, but comfortably make the playoffs.
Nice. Well, I'm the negative ninny. Then I need to sort myself out and get predicting playoffs. I just can't bring myself to do it, but it's great to see that. After a very indifferent summer, a pessimistic summer, there's a lot of positivity and optimism going around, which is great. Thanks a lot, Chris and Craig. I'll thank you as well, Chris, for jumping
cheers,
on once
mate.
again. But a big thanks to you as well, Craig, for jumping on and joining us on tonight's sort of summer transfer window review. Quickly, if any Boro fans somehow don't know who you are, where can they find you? The Gazette, where's the best place to find you and all the great stuff you do?
Yeah, so obviously everything I write will be in the Gazette or on the Teesside Live website. And, if you don't want to go there, then I'm on X, Craig_Johns and Blue Sky, which I think is the same. No, it's not. I don't know if anyone's even still using Blue Sky, but at Craig Johns, Gaz Borough, G-A-Z Borough, on Blue Sky. I don't know if anyone's still using it, but I'm still hanging on to it. So
we'll put links. We'll put all the links in the description anyway if people want to find you. But a big thanks once again, and to everyone who's watched or listened. Of course, you can listen to these on your chosen podcast providers if you prefer. But if you're watching here on the YouTube channel, do hit a like on the video, subscribe to the channel for much more Boro content, of course. Do leave comments in the section below. And until the next one, thanks for watching, everybody. And we'll see you next time.